Welcome to Walking the Way. We're on book club, still reading Renovation of the Heart in chapter 2. We're on question 8, which is, do you agree or disagree that our actions really do tell who we are? The section that I thought of when I began to try and answer that question was the title, the heading is Influence on Action, and the quote that stood out to me was, usually what we do is not an outcome of deliberate choice and a mere act of will, but is more of a relenting to pressure on the will from one or more of the dimensions of the self. If the 6 dimensions are properly aligned with God and with what is good, and therefore with each other, that mere relenting will be good, and our actions will simply be the good fruit of the good tree. Because that's for me, that's the goal, is for our whole lives to be so well ordered that our affections are transformed into the affections of Christ. And so that John 15:7, which says, if you abide in me, my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. We'd be safe for that we could be given whatever we want, because whatever we want happens to be exactly what God wants, because we have been so thoroughly transformed that that's just true of us. That's just a simple description of our reality. And so, to answer the question explicitly, yes, I think what we do is a true reflection of what we are. In fact, I would go so far as to say that we only ever do exactly what we want in any given moment. And it may not be what we consciously want, but some part of us, some unruly faction within us does want that, and it wants it with enough strength to overwhelm the rest of us.
Yeah, good point. I'd say just to add to that, a couple paragraphs later, page 35, Ward gets into this whole concept of minimizing when we mess something up and saying, oh, I just blew it. Today, one of the most common rationalizations of sin or folly is, oh, I just blew it. While there is some point to such a remark, it is not one those who use it hope for. It does not exonerate them. While it may be true that there are other circumstances in which I would not have done the foolish or sinful thing I did, and what I did may not represent me fully, blowing it does represent me fully. I'm the kind of person who blows it. Which just kind of goes towards the beginning of this section that Ryan was talking about, where if the 6 aspects of the self are properly ordered, then that inner relenting is always going to be towards a good and wholesome thing. And if we're in a position where we've done something wrong, that's because our life isn't ordered in such a way to the point that when we relent to the parts of ourselves, we do the right thing. So our foundation should be ordered. Each of these 6 aspects should be ordered around Christ. And if it isn't, then that will result in us messing up. And so the thing that we've messed up in doesn't represent who we are, but it represents a flaw within ourselves that led us to that point, essentially, is what it's saying here. And so in that sense, our actions do tell who we are. It's not that if we mess something up or if we do something good, then the good or bad that we do is everything about us. Christianity is not a works-based faith, but it shows the fruit of who we are. And so, like Ryan was saying, we're always going to do what our innermost self wants. And so, back to what he was saying with the inner relenting, what we do is not an outcome of deliberate choice and a mere act of will, but is more of a relenting to pressure on the will from one or more dimensions of the self. So that relenting is a better representation of who we are than the action itself, but the action is an indication of whether or not there may be a flaw in one of our 6 aspects.
Right. And usually, normal day-to-day circumstances, we don't blow it, right? We have enough space, enough quote-unquote self-control that, generally speaking, we do what we consciously want to do. And that's not really a good test of who we are. It's those sort of unreflexive reactive moments where we're caught off guard or something unexpected happens that sort of bypasses the facade that we put out to the rest of the world, that we can behave in a way that sort of projects the image that we would like to onto reality. But in those moments of reactivity, the true self comes out, and that's kind of the fruit. That's the most accurate picture of the fruit of your life that you can get, is what happens when you're not able to clamp down on those 6 aspects of yourself, and just whatever is in comes out. And usually it's somewhat conveniently in the presence of another person. And if that person is well ordered, they're well aligned with God and his will, and care for you, that person can then point out the rottenness of your fruit in such a way that it is helpful and edifying to you rather than condemning. And that just ties back into the relational dimension of the self, and I guess provides a path towards a vision for what that should look like. And that is that you should surround yourself with people that are consciously seeking to order their lives around Christ and care for you, which is kind of the same thing.
Right. And in the same sense, just as you aren't going to be blowing it or making mistakes every day, you also aren't going to be, there's a flip side to that as well, where a true test of good results isn't always going to come about every day as well. And
right.
So there's a sense in which you also need to get caught up in the good actions that you do aren't necessarily who you are. And so that can be a matter of circumstance. Like, it's easy for us to just, based on circumstance, do a good or nice thing, perhaps just because we want to be perceived well. And it's not necessarily a fruit of our inner dimensions. It's more just a matter of happenstance, or it's more, I mean, I guess it could potentially fall into social context, but it's more just a matter of just doing what feels natural. Like, we can be kind to people very easily just out of a sense of habit without being necessarily a very kind or loving person. So there's also sort of an investigation there that needs to be done of understanding when you are just a creature of habit and you aren't truly a loving person. I think it's easy for us to consider ourselves, because we generally act nice, it's easy to consider ourselves a fairly loving person. But we aren't necessarily actually oriented in a direction towards love, or we're truly caring about people. It's more of just, when we encounter people, we don't treat them poorly, and we consider that to be love. But that's not a proper understanding.
And I would point that back to sort of the social dimension, because like that's really hard to see in ourselves, but other people can watch and guard us in that, which that's still tough, because most of what you're talking about is just being polite or people pleasing, which is generally not looked down that much by normal society and culture. Like, of the 2 errors, being a jerk to people is easy to spot. Everyone agrees, don't do that. But being nice rather than kind, or being polite, or being a people pleaser, 1, it's just a little bit more difficult to spot, and 2, it's generally culturally accepted. So that, again, we have to be very specific in how we construct our social environment to have people in our lives be like, hey,
right, exactly.
You're not being kind here, you're being nice here because you would like to be perceived as a person that is helpful and polite and nice and pleasant to be around, rather than I want to do good to this person, whether they're pleased with me for having done so or not.
Right, exactly.
So I guess back to, maybe to apply the question in a way that can be actionable for ourselves and for our massive viewing audience. The question could be, I suppose, massaged into the form of: consider the last time you blew it. Consider the circumstances under which you blew it. And consider how would the person that you want to be react in that situation in the future. I think that would be a pretty productive exercise in vision casting.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't completely related to the question, but it's sort of under this heading, and I don't think we're going to cover it elsewhere. So one thing I did want to mention, Willard sort of transitions from this concept of our actions and how they relate to our inner selves or our true selves, and he then pulls that into our true selves, when properly ordered, are always going to be ordered in relation to God. And so he comes up with this little diagram and talks about how in life away from God, order of dominance is body, soul, mind, spirit, God. And by contrast, in a proper life ordered in relation to God, it's God, spirit, mind, soul, body. And in between, he mentions a quote from Leo Tolstoy, who once said, "There are two gods. There's the God that people generally believe in, a God who has to serve them, sometimes in very refined ways, say by merely giving them peace of mind. This God does not exist, but the God whom people forget, the God whom we all serve, exists and is the prime cause of our existence and of all that we perceive." And I don't think that that's something that we that quote is still relevant today, and it's not something that we recognize enough. I think that particularly here where we live in the Bible Belt, there's sort of a general, especially in contrast to Europe, there's a general belief in God, and people generally believe in sort of the creator God that is distant. They're sort of deists in the way where they believe in a sort of distant God that when you die may potentially care about whether you were a good or bad person, but he's not particularly involved in your life, and you don't have to be particularly involved with him. And part of what the church needs to do a better job of doing is explaining the true God, the reality that is the actual God, and the obligation that we have to serve him, because we were made in the true God's image and not in this false God's image. And so in order for us to properly order ourselves, we have to be doing so in relation to the true God, and we have to understand his nature, and we have to understand the obligation that we have to serve him. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting section here, and I like that Tolstoy quote. I didn't know where else we were going to talk about it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but
no, I just think that relational piece, that we are relating to God, and it is not possible to relate to something that doesn't exist, as sort of that figment of our imaginations that Tolstoy mentions of a God that serves our caprice or whim. That God he just doesn't exist, and he has described himself as relational. So you can't serve a God that is self-described as relational by trying to relate to something that doesn't exist. That's just you're just missing the whole point there, which is another way of sort of testing the fruit of your faith in general is, does God ever disagree with you? And if he doesn't, you're probably relating to a figment of your imagination. So that's another application piece for you guys. And with that, I think we're good.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Walk in the Way Book Club. Please like, comment, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. We can't wait to see you in the next one. God bless.